Now, not all workers are making $5 an hour, right? Like how Henry Ford's workers were. And you have a lot of workers who are experiencing some pretty bad working conditions, working 12-hour days. We've talked about this before. And so you have many workers who want to join unions so that they can organize themselves and fight or negotiate for better working conditions, more pay, etc. Okay, so you have labor organizations still very powerful in the early 1900s. You also have the socialist perspective. We talked a little bit about socialism before. The socialist perspective is still very popular in the early 1900s. And so you even have in the United States the formation of the Socialist Party in 1901. Okay, so it's a whole political party, hundreds of thousands of members as we start to move into the 1910s. And so it's a very popular ideology, socialism, the idea that businesses should be owned by the people, not just private owners who are taking advantage of everybody and instilling inequality in society and taking all the wealth while everybody else is getting paid these minuscule wages. No, socialists want to divide things up evenly where everything is owned by everybody. Okay, and so this is a very popular ideology, especially popular not just in the US, but in Western Europe. Okay, you have socialist parties developing there as well, and they're electing people to office, right? So it's very popular ideology at the time. Okay, in the U.S., Eugene Debs, you can see him pictured right here. Eugene Debs is probably the most well-known socialist at the time, and in about 10 years after the Socialist Party is developed, 11 years, Debs will actually be running for president. Okay, doesn't win, but just to give you an idea of how socialist ideology was popular at the time. But unionization is still going strong in the early 1900s. You have the American Federation of Labor, which developed a little earlier during the Gilded Age. But the American Federation of Labor is a little bit different than the Knights of Labor. Remember, we talked about the Knights of Labor as like one of the early unions that came together. So you have the American Federation of Labor. It's like this big federation of unions. So you have different local unions all over the country, and they come together in a big federation. And so, yeah, they're trying to fight for workers' rights, but they aren't going about it the same way that the Knights of Labor were. They're not really getting involved in politics so much, right? And so they are more so focused on negotiating with employers directly, working with employers to try to come about with a solution to try to improve the conditions for workers and their pay. The AFL is also much more exclusive. They're not so inclusive. They're not, allowing just anybody to join the AFL. It's very limited in its membership because you have to be a skilled worker to join the AFL, right? And the majority of workers, especially immigrants, people of color, are semi-skilled workers, right? So they can't join the AFL, right? So it's mostly native-born Anglo-Americans who are in the AFL, okay? And so you're going to see the development, kind of a reaction to this, of another labor organization as we move into the early 1900s. And that is the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW. Okay, now the IWW is much more inclusive. So you have, people of any racial background, people of any gender can join the IWW. They want diversity within their organization because they feel that if they have diversity, that means that those segments of the population will support the movement of the IWW when they go on strike. And eventually, as we start getting in the early 1900s, there's, strikes and labor organization start to become an issue of freedom of speech. Why? Because when people go on strike in the early 1900s, you're going to have local governments and state governments not allowing them to speak in public, right? They can't go out in the public and picket in front of the business, and they can't hand out pamphlets, which is promoting their perspective or their ideology. It becomes against the law, okay? And so that becomes an issue of freedom of speech, and you're going to have a number of worker organizations taking this issue to the courts, okay? Taking this issue to the courts and eventually winning and gaining the right to be able to promote their cause in public. So in the early 1900s, you start to see this movement towards progressivism. What is progressivism? It's a political ideology, right? It's a political perspective. And a lot of it has to do with the role of government. What is the role of government? Some people, fear big government. They don't want to have a strong federal government because they feel like we can't control the federal government. It's so far away. The representatives aren't going to be held to public scrutiny because, they're so far away from their state when they're elected. Big government's going to intervene in our lives and take away our rights. You have all these fears, right? But the progressives did not have these fears. The progressives saw big government as a good thing, right? That big government can intervene in society and actually do good things, can accomplish positive things and help to address these inequalities that we were talking about, right? Bring about an 8-hour workday for laborers, right? A minimum wage for laborers, unemployment, right? Government can do all that, can help people. They can help workers who are suffering maybe in their industrial jobs. Big government can help women, right? How? Big government can pass laws that recognize women's rights, such as the right to vote, right? So big government can be a good thing in the eyes of the progressives of the early 1900s, okay? One aspect of this ideology is something called pragmatism, okay? So pragmatism, we're talking about the use of science to analyze government policy, right? So you take data about how policy is affecting people's lives, and then you update that policy, you make changes to it in order to improve society, okay? So you have this emphasis on we can use science to improve society through big government, okay? And progressives also like to rely on experts, right? You have examples of progressive governors, like in the state of Wisconsin, Governor La Follette, right? Where he has a bunch of experts in various different fields that he appoints to positions within his administration. And these experts are the ones who are helping to run his administration. They're helping to come up with ideas and policies, etc. Right? They're supporting him. So there's this big reliance on experts, this big reliance on science, and the idea that through these avenues, government can change society for the better. And so that's really the progressive perspective of this time period. And the progressives did have some success, but more so on the state level, also at the federal level too. We'll talk about that. But first, let's talk a little bit about progressive success at the state level. Okay, so in the state of Oregon, for example, you have a progressive leader by the name of William U'Ren, and U'Ren helps to bring about something called the Oregon system. Okay, it may sound a little familiar because in California we ended up adopting the Oregon system. Okay, so the Oregon system includes things like the initiative, right, in the political process. Okay, the initiative, the referendum, the recall, direct primaries, okay? These are all aspects of the Oregon system. So let's talk about these in a little bit more detail. All right, so the initiative, right? What's the initiative? This is where voters, regular citizens can come together, bring up a law, an issue that they want to encode into law, get a bunch of signatures, people to agree like, yeah, we want to vote on this. And then if they get enough signatures on this initiative, then it's going to come up for a vote. And then when it's time to go vote, you go vote on this initiative and it could get passed into law. You are bypassing the state legislature, you see? So it's like the people themselves are coming up with this law and they're voting on it and they're going to pass it or not. All right, direct democracy for the people themselves, not through a representative, someone they voted into office. See, a referendum, it's kind of like that too. So a referendum is where you have laws being passed by the state legislature, but then the voters, the people, can take a vote on those same laws and decide whether they want to keep those laws or whether they want to get rid of them. Okay, so it's basically involving the people in a more direct form of democracy. The recall is where the people can vote on whether they want to remove a politician from office, right? You guys familiar with that? Of course, right? We've seen a recall in recent times, an attempted recall in California, right? And direct primaries, right? Direct primaries where the people get to decide who are going to be the candidates from the various political parties who are going to run for office. Okay, so all of these are ways to get the people more involved and pull political power from those who would be known as political bosses, who had a lot of political power at the time. Okay, a political boss would be someone who's a part of the political party in a certain area, right? So you have some individual in Oregon, maybe in the Capitol, and he is like running the political party, maybe the Republican Party there. Okay, so you have an individual there. He's in the Republican Party. He may not even hold office, right? He may not even be like an office holder, but he's just someone who works for the party, and he has a lot of influence, and he can influence people's votes. He may like bribe people and say, "Hey, everybody, free shoes for everybody," right? And he's just, has all these free shoes. You can see that there's like a picture of that right here. Where you have an example of one of these political bosses just giving free shoes away to people to try to influence their vote. Okay, so there's these corrupt political bosses who had too much influence in the democratic process, and so that's why you see the Oregon system coming about. California says, "Hey, that sounds like a great idea. We're going to take that system on too." So yeah, we got the initiative, the referendum, the recall as well. All right, state of Washington as well. So if this is all during the progressive era, these are some of the successes of progressives at the time. In California, we have the example of a progressive governor during this era by the name of Hiram Johnson. Okay, so Hiram Johnson, he was in office. He promoted the idea of regulating the railroads, which was a big issue because we talked about in the past how railroads were pretty corrupt at the time, right? And so they needed some government regulation. Hiram Johnson, he's helping to make that a reality, right? He's stopping child labor in California, right? So remember, at this time, it's pretty normal for children to be out there working in factories, getting maimed, getting killed, or just working all day. You know what I mean? So things like that. These are some of the victories for progressives during this time. California, you have Hiram Johnson. Other states, you have progressives as well in office, trying to use government to decrease the inequalities in society.